So welcome to the April first Friday with our guest, James Dobson. And James is a tech media specialist and is going to share his knowledge and experience today with us of search engine optimization, AdWords, and then do a brief look at the end of a specific product that he's developed for the franchise community called FranchiseBase. The initial session will probably take around about 35 minutes. And at the end of that, we've got open questions and answers. And feel free to put questions in the chat room or save them till the end of James' session. And then we'll take questions from the floor. So thank you, and over to James.
Okay, so hi everyone. My name's James. My company is called Outward Digital, and I've worked quite closely with a franchise company probably over about the last 10 years or so. And in that time, worked with a lot of franchises on website development projects, marketing campaigns, various kind of marketing material. It's often used by franchises like PDF brochures, things like that. And about 2 years ago, after spending quite a lot of time working with franchises, I've often kind of found similar kind of needs tend to arise in kind of all things digital, and when it comes to managing a franchise online, sharing details, sharing information, marketing activities. So I started working on FranchiseBase. So after the presentation, I'll just give a really quick demo of FranchiseBase.
Okay, so today I'm going to be talking about online franchise recruitment. With this presentation, I'll start at the core of your franchise offering, your website. The reason for that is, it's your base online. It's going to be the home of all of your digital content. And it's going to be for your customers, for your potential franchisees. Everything is kind of encapsulated within your website. From there, we'll move on to franchise recruitment sources, how you can better engage with your franchising leads, and then finally, how we can plan a really strong recruitment campaign that makes use of multiple sources and platforms for finding new leads. I'll then move on to a short demo of FranchiseBase, and we can wrap up with a Q&A where you can ask anything you like. So let's get started. So what makes a great franchise website? To really start getting into the detail of what's going to make a successful recruitment campaign, we'll start at the beginning by talking about the key elements of a franchise website. Starting with websites, like I mentioned, because in many cases it really sits at the core of your franchise offering. Even if you expect you're going to use a specific channel or platform for recruitment like social media or a particular directory, in any case, a franchise website should really encapsulate every aspect of what you're about, from your services for customers through to the offering for a potential franchisee. With these three elements, I think that they're all essential to building a franchise website that's going to offer a really solid foundation for all aspects of franchises operations. These elements follow a really common approach that I use when planning a website with a client, but they also cover how your franchise might be judged by a prospective franchisee. So the first element is quite a simple one, and it's about the products and services that you provide to your customers. I'm not going to go too far into this one today because it's pretty obvious. No doubt that every franchise does this, and before you adopted a franchise model with your business, you were probably doing the same. Yeah, it's about promoting the services you offer or the products to the end customer. We also know that the way a franchise advertises their services is really dependent on both the type of service or product that they provide, as well as how their franchise model is structured. So for example, if you're a service-related franchise, it's dependent on location availability, like mobile and van-based franchises, or even class-based or session-based franchises. You're probably going to use a simple method like postcode search to determine the location of the customer before you present what is or isn't available. When an area is covered by a franchisee, you might have a mini site for that location, and that tends to give the franchisee a kind of sense of ownership for their territory. Conversely, if your franchise is more product orientated, then you might follow a more typical e-commerce model where the franchisee plays their part at a late stage in the purchase process. So over the past few years, I've definitely seen a shift in franchising towards centralizing the service offering for customers across the whole network, and I think that can only be a good thing because it reduces duplication, it saves on costs, it makes marketing budgets more manageable, and it all feeds into the search rankings back to that one online presence of the overall franchise network. So looking at how you offer the journey from homepage to buying a service or a product for the customer, it's important to consider how a prospective franchisee might see your services, and then for them to understand how they would slot into the business. So as well as that, how they're going to play a part in generating inquiries once they're up and running, because if that forms part of the franchise model. With all of that in mind, for a new franchise, it's a pretty common challenge to try and balance a website between, a business that's delivering services and now adopting a franchise model, without alienating customers, but then also being ready for their first franchisees to come aboard and be able to present the franchise model to the world. So a common way that maybe you do this is with location-based search. Postcode search gives you that extra benefit that you can also make use of with things like if you use postcode search for customers, you can then use these location searches to gather details of the visitors and potential customers in the area that you're not yet covering, as well as appealing to individuals who might be interested in becoming a franchisee in the area that they live or they're searching for. The other benefit of that is that you can track these kinds of queries, these searches for locations. You can then gauge where the demand for your next franchisees might be. So definitely use that information to direct your focus and attention for priority areas, if that's practical as part of your kind of franchise expansion plans. So moving on to the next element, content and resource. So content and resource is an area that I think is more important than ever for franchises. This is a concept that every franchise has the ability to implement and do really well. And at its core, it's all about sharing your knowledge and demonstrating your experience. And with that, you're giving something away for free in order to prove your credentials as an expert in your field. And that's kind of sharing should come quite naturally. And it is often best coming from you, the franchisor, or your team, and at the very least, kind of under your direction to whoever publishes your content. So the important part of content and resource is it's not about the hard sales pitch at all. People are really looking for information, inspiration, or insights. And with really good content, we're aiming to do two things. So the first one is we're going to let the individual reading the content find us organically by search engines, social media or similar, rather than a paid advert. And the second part of that is that we're going to give them the information that they need to make an informed decision of their own. So we can then capitalize on that through things like calls to action, links to click through, and basically building a really nicely planned website journey, no matter which page they originally started from. So you can see from the diagram on the right that the individual, and that could either be a potential customer or a potential franchisee, they're going to follow their own route through the site. And rather than being funneled through from a landing page to make an inquiry. So, it'll start with a search. They'll probably land on that specific page with the information they're looking for. And then there's the potential there that could feed through into either, the service, or they might want to learn more about the franchise opportunity. Now, organic content. So when you really start to, build a recognized presence for your content, it can pay dividends for like years to come. You've probably heard the organic versus paid comparison before. We know that paid ads can give us immediate and sometimes, when done well, reliable results, but they always come with a cost. So in contrast, organic content is about finding your rightful place in the search results. And it's usually, it can be a slow process to build momentum, but it's over time, it's going to bring you consistent results. And it could be for a long period of time, the further established that you become online and within search engine listings. So this isn't to say that paid advertising doesn't have a place in franchise marketing. It absolutely does, but relying on it alone will miss reaching an important segment of your audience, because there's a lot of people who actively ignore sponsored ads. And they want information, and they want impartial information, and they want knowledge, and you can provide that with your expertise. Really good example of this is for like a content-driven website is Money Saving Expert, which we're probably all familiar with. The site's been around for a long time, but it started with content alone before it was monetized into this commission-based behemoth site that it is today. It's clearly not a franchise, but there were plenty of takeaways that can be put into your own presence, your own website. Things like offering impartial content that avoids that hard sell. Instead, with maybe just a gentle nudge in the direction of your services or to learn more about your franchise opportunity. And there was a time when Money Saving Expert didn't even really generate commission. It started with the goal of providing a useful service, information on kind of personal finance, and then it found its way to monetize into, I think it's 30 million plus pounds a year company that it is today. Next, for a franchise example, we've got cat care guides from the Cat Butler. I worked with Sandra on the transition for her business website into a franchise website ready for a franchise model. And, Sandra was already writing this really great content that's useful for any cat owner. We packaged this up as cat care guides. And aside from what it is, useful information, it demonstrates so many things about the company as well, like its values of putting their clients' pets first, its knowledge, and that helps customers to really trust them when they're going to be caring for their cats. As a final example, something a bit different. When you make content that's for people first and selling second, there's always a chance it could find wide appeal really quickly. So this was a side project that I worked on over Christmas, 2020 I think it was. And my wife wasn't very happy since I should have been relaxing. I had this idea to build a database site for what works and doesn't on the latest games console. As a bit of a gamer, I knew that I would find it useful and maybe other people would too. The site got practically nothing in terms of views for the first month, and when I posted it around, people just weren't all that interested, I suppose because they get this impression that I'm trying to self-promote, and people don't really tend to respond all that well to that. And then I mentioned it to someone in passing or on Twitter or similar, and they really shouted about it because it came from them telling people about it and not me who made it. People were more convinced, and it ended up going from pretty much 0 views on the Monday to almost 200,000 views in a single day by the Wednesday, as well as getting featured on some of the biggest tech blogs. So like anything that goes viral, it eventually calmed down. But even today, it sees thousands of visitors per day. It is very actively and widely used. And my overall point with this is that even if it's not directly related to franchises, it's that there's nothing stopping you as a franchisor or working within a franchise of doing the same within your niche, of sharing something, producing some content, it finding its appeal, and all feeding back into helping the recognition of your franchise. Now for the final element, we've got your franchise opportunity, and this is your chance on your website to really sell the franchising concept and what your opportunity is all about. This is where you can really tell people about what you're offering. So too often, I even see this with really established franchises. They don't have all that much information. Sometimes it's nothing much more than an inquiry form on a page. But my perspective is you should really offer as much information as possible to explain your opportunity. There's so much to talk about, and you want it to be informative, you want it to be inspiring, and you want something that's going to excite your ideal prospect. So what should live within your franchise opportunity section? Firstly, it should offer a detailed outline of the franchise, everything from its background, the team, their experience, things like capital that's required, what experience the ideal candidate will have. Sometimes you will want to hold information back, perhaps because it could be a factor that might otherwise exclude somebody that would be a really good candidate. But I've always seen that the more detail that you provide up front, a higher likelihood of good quality candidates beginning to make inquiries. So next, much like I recommended for the main areas of your website, you can use insightful content that's related to your industry to inform people that could become or are interested in your franchise. And if you do that and you hit the keywords that are going to rank in search engines, you might find ways to appeal to people already working within your industry that don't yet know that franchising could be the perfect option for them. The third point to shout about is the success stories of your franchise. And this is about sharing the experiences of your franchisees and team. And it could be a combination of articles as well as things like interview style videos, podcasts, and other rich content. If you're a newly established franchise and you haven't yet secured your first franchisees, you still have a lot to talk about. Your own experiences, your work lifestyle and what it offers, as well as that of your team members. There's no need to frame these stories as franchisees because the result in the end is almost the same. The final point is to give a really clear route to progress and learn more about the opportunity. As much as we like to think that every user follows a specific path through a website, websites are non-linear, so someone could land on your website from a search to a general content page under your franchising section, maybe a bit of information about the industry that you're in. Make sure that even if they do that, you're going to give them a clear call to action that leads them through to whatever it is to take the next step. So that could be an inquiry form or maybe to schedule a first meeting. Okay, so now to summarize, once you have these three elements covered, you can look at your web presence from the perspective of a potential franchisee. Each of these elements is going to be quite important to them. So first one, content and resource. It demonstrates to a prospective franchisee your knowledge and the experience. Promoting products and services. It demonstrates the demand for your services and products. It proves you've got a market fit that customers can buy into, and it also demonstrates how the franchisee themselves might fit into your model. Finally, the franchise opportunity dives into the real detail of the opportunity, and it hopefully informs them and inspires them to take action, to get in touch, and it gives them that on-ramp to start the process. So as we can see, for the foundation of good online recruitment, it's really important that these three elements are used cohesively and give individuals the confidence in your business to learn more about your franchise and its opportunity. An extra benefit is that once you have all this content prepared, it's going to become much easier to branch out into off-site resources and platforms where you can promote your franchise. Some of these we'll go into next will loop back to the website too, so it's all just going to kind of feed into each other. With all of this in place, we can take a look at the routes we're going to take to source new franchisee candidates. So now that we've got a website we're confident it's going to attract audiences, how can we bring them in? I'd like to say there's a secret to securing great candidates, but in reality it's often about using multiple sources to find which are most effective for your franchise. A combination that works for your budget to bring a good caliber of leads. So here we have a list. It's not at all exhaustive, and you probably know of quite a lot of these, but just to go through them. Your website, as we've just covered, for both organic search as well as paid advertising, which includes things like remarketing, as well as links back and shares from other websites. Another thing for that is guest posting. You might guest blog on another site in return for a link back. Gives you a backlink, potentially brings people through from those other sites. We've also got franchise directories, and there are a lot of them. In a nutshell, they give you a captive audience of people who are actively looking for franchise opportunities. Next one, social media, both paid and organic. There are a ton of different approaches that you can use to find leads. LinkedIn's a really good example. I'd really recommend checking out Ed's presentation last month, which was really good. Finally, we have everything else. Things like outreach, exhibitions, running Discovery Day, webinars and events, and of course print media. When you use any platform to recruit, my advice is to make the most of the content and brand. Building your brand and making sure that it's consistently designed is really going to help for people to take notice, and to make sure your content follows the tone that sets your franchise apart from others. My opinion is that good branding makes you more persuasive, so there's absolutely no reason not to do it. Next, tailor the content for the audience of that platform. You'll use a different approach if you promote on Instagram than a directory listing. You won't post a wall of text. You'll share an image that you're trying to tell a story with. Last one is to make sure that if they're interested, they know what to do next. For most platforms, it's really straightforward, For others, you might have to get a bit more creative. Some platforms, you've got this very short window of opportunity where you've got somebody's attention, so you really need to be able to capitalize on it quickly and give them the next step to secure them as a lead. Here's an example. This is a Google ad landing page where we've segmented ads by location. In this example, if you're in Greater London, you'll get an ad that's personalized based on that. There are so many ways that you can take this further with recruitment. You can talk about the market size for a location, the income potential there, and what the demand already is for your services. And next with this, we're going to give them a clear route to make an inquiry. And with this approach, I'd really recommend testing different versions of landing pages. Make sure that you've got the tracking set up so you can use the data and the results to understand what works, what doesn't, and how you can improve it. Next example, LinkedIn, as well as a few other social networks. They let you use things called lead generation ads. So this is a good case where if you can offer something useful to somebody, you can in return get them as a lead. So you could package up a PDF, offer access to some video content, and you can make it as targeted as you need to be by kind of defining the audience that you're gonna use for the ad. A really good opportunity here, especially when using a few platforms, is to funnel them all through into one place where you can manage the leads, and that's what we're going to move on to next. So managing your leads. Once you've started your campaign with at least one source, you'll hopefully start getting leads and receiving leads. In franchising, we really understand that realistically, we're only going to secure a very small number of franchisees from a pretty big pool of leads and prospects that come through. When we start recruiting, more often when using multiple sources, it can get quite difficult to manage. So it's absolutely worthwhile automating wherever possible so you don't lose quality, viable prospects. So how do we make sure we're using our time effectively? We're giving ourselves time for the tasks that need more of a manual intervention, like LinkedIn or writing new content that's going to attract other people. I mentioned earlier that managing a broad number of leads can be a real challenge, and here's how it's often done, particularly when you're first getting started. So personally, I know I'm the most organized person in the world, so this just wouldn't work for me. Even if you're really organized, there's a few good arguments not to use this approach. Mainly the fact that it's time consuming to manage all these emails and keep up to date with them. It's very easy for an email to go astray or to be a little bit slow to make a response, which potentially is the worst thing that can happen when you're paying good money for a lead. And the last one is it can be inconsistent too, because we're all really busy. It's sometimes it's hard to keep on top of everything. So with that, my recommendation, a better way to manage all of your leads is to put them into one structured place for them. In an ideal world, new leads will be imported in from different platforms, and you won't need to manually bring them in. You'll be able to do that automatically. The argument for this is pretty straightforward. It lets you track every lead and make sure they're up to date, and it also lets you collaborate with others when you need to. Last thing for this is when it comes to personal information, it's always best to secure the data in just one place. Even if you start with a spreadsheet for this, like a checklist alongside each lead, a few notes, that's a pretty good place to start. And then there's everything else from that to a fully featured system, CRMs. There are a lot of options available. My next recommendation is to automate your communications with new leads and prospects. So when you're confident that you're bringing together all of your leads, you can really start to think about how you can get some more consistency, and that's the confidence that it's going to give you of knowing that you're giving your best, most polished information to every lead that's going to encourage them to take whatever your next step is as part of the process. So in this example on the right, we're taking all of our inquiries and we're automatically sending them the initial material. It's probably a brochure or a prospectus, maybe in a PDF format, and then we're looking for some commitment from them to share a bit more information about themselves. Once we've got that, you'll probably look towards setting up a real meeting. And the beauty of this and automation in general is that everything up to this point of getting that scheduled meeting in place has happened automatically. And then with the content itself, it becomes even more important when you're working with Franchise Directory, because most of them work by candidates building this short list of franchises they're interested in, and all of the inquiries from that person get sent off at once. If you use automation, you can be the first to respond, and for a motivated individual, it could be a big influencer on whether they'll engage with you more so over the other ones that they're interested in. So you bring in all of your leads into one place from different sources. You're going to use some automation, and the content of the automation, it should be engaging as possible. And you're thinking what kind of comms you can automate. Email's probably the first one that will come to mind. So for emails, I really recommend tailoring them to your brand, because good branding will build trust. Personalizing them to the individual, because it'll help catch your attention. And then go back to your website content, link back to that more detailed information, because they might not have seen it yet. So a real benefit of standardizing things when you use automation is you can really quickly learn what works and what doesn't, and then from there you can start to fine tune and get better results. So the final, and it's an important point, avoid spamming people. So if you're using automation and you're sending a lot of emails, if you're going to send them in a sequence, give a good amount of time between each contact that you make with them, and also decide on a cut-off point. It could be after 4 weeks or so, you say, right, well, we haven't really had any engagement with them. We tried to call them a couple of times and it's not got anywhere. It's probably a good time to maybe move them elsewhere, send emails more infrequently, something like that. Next suggestion is text messaging. So text messaging should absolutely be one of the tools that you use to engage with a prospective franchisee, because it's a good way to prompt them into action. 98% of texts read immediately, so it's effective, but you really do have to use it sparingly, because it does feel a lot more personal than an email. And with that said, using a restrained approach, you can use text messaging to nudge your candidate along, or give them a prompt. There's other options too. If you're, depending on your ideal candidate and what kind of apps they might use in your market, it could be WhatsApp or Messenger, and there's ways to automate that as well. So now we've covered many of these elements that make up what will be your recruitment campaign. It's a good idea to bring everything together, and that might look like this. So bring everything together with a recruitment workflow. If you can map out your recruitment campaign with a good workflow, it'll let you see the full journey of a lead from their initial inquiry through to engaging and going to the next stage. And if you use that in combination with email tracking and a system that might prompt you to schedule a call rather than you having to remember it, you'll really have time to focus on more of the detail. So we can see with this basic example, the workflow starts from initial inquiry, and that could come from one of many platforms or sources, maybe your website, a few from Directories, a few on social media. It could be anywhere. Once you've got the lead brought in, you can send them a prospectus and maybe a text message to thank them for their interest, remind them to check their email, possible spam folder, that kind of stuff. Next, we might be prompted to give them a call. If everything goes well, you can move forward fairly quickly to your next step. If they're a bit slower to respond, we can start to deliver the communication we talked about over a set period of time, and that'll hopefully encourage them to engage with us, learn more about the franchise. If a bit further down the road they don't engage, we can slow things down, and maybe we'll send them an occasional update. That every candidate is different. They might still be weighing up options or in full-time employment. There could be all kinds of potential reasons, but it's absolutely possible that they could come back to you later once their situation changes. You can definitely see here that I'm not advocating automating everything. Communication is really important, but it can definitely help us to work more efficiently. And if we can lay out some of these elements, especially the automated ones, we can fine-tune them and improve them over time. So for the final section, this is about measuring your campaign performance, and that is looking at the results from your campaign, understanding what's effective and what isn't, and then improving it as a result. So here's a few ways you might be able to do that. For the first one, if we look at where your leads are coming from, it's quite easy to think about how many leads you're getting for your money, but the quality of those leads is absolutely more important. So with that, you can segment each of these sources. Again, if you look at the diagram on the right, we've got the pie chart and it's several sources of leads. And you can start to think about trends. You know, do leads from certain sources, directories or platforms tend to engage more than others? You know, from my experience, the ones who've come from your site, the leads, and read your material and maybe taken a good bit of time to kind of digest everything, they do tend to be more motivated to learn more. But that's not going to account for every scenario. Another consideration is figuring out what content performs best. So hopefully you'll be able to track your email open and click rates for your marketing emails. You might find that some don't really get the response that you were hoping for, so it's worth exploring how you might be able to make them more convincing and motivational to the reader, and that's going to in turn get them to engage with you. If you've already put in place everything I've covered today, you're going to be in a good position to try out new sources. So you might have been focused on directories to bring your leads, but we know that the ideal candidate is often somebody within your industry that doesn't really know that they want to be a franchisee yet. That's going to involve more creative, manual aspects of using sites like LinkedIn, writing content, and trying out new angles and approaches to appeal to the people you want to reach. My final point is that we're all constrained by some level of budget. And unlike a product, it's really difficult to work out what the true cost of a conversion is for a secured franchisee. So you've given one platform or channel a good chance. If it hasn't brought the results that you wanted, there's plenty more out there for you to try.
Well, FranchiseBase is web-based software. It's got features to be able to kind of collaborate with your franchisees as a franchisor and the whole network. Originally, it started out almost solely as a tool for things like operations manuals, so that you can, present your manual, share it with your franchisees, be able to update it, change it, and have it in one place. Because I think previously, quite often, it was a case of, you had a Word document, an update would be made, it would change over time. People could end up with an earlier version, something that's out of date. And with this, it was to really just offer a good way to, these documents are big, to structure them as well as possible. So that's the idea of that. You can do things like bookmark, update, share notes, generate PDFs from them, all those kinds of things. That was where it started, and then it developed into things like sharing your branding items, sharing documents, discussions, tasks, notifications, all that kind of stuff. And then more recently, we've kind of moved into to offer some franchise recruitment tools to go along with this. And just to give you an example, what I mentioned in the presentation about mapping out that recruitment workflow, I've actually got an example here. So this is just a demo system, but it follows the same approach. So essentially, it starts with the recruitment sources. So you've got multiple areas and sources where you recruit and find new leads. They immediately receive the brochure through FranchiseBase, and then moving on to a kind of the next stage where they'll start to get some of that marketing information that I was talking about, things like text messages, emails, and all of these are kind of pre-scheduled. They kind of, they run on this schedule over a period of time. In this example, again, things like call the prospect, the initial call, let's say, it can be automated, so you'll get an email notification when when that needs to happen. In this case, it's kind of after 1 day, and then maybe after 4 weeks, we'll move from kind of that new prospect to another category that's maybe they haven't engaged, and then we'll try again, a bit more information, and then really from there, just kind of like following the rest of the process. So this is, what you're looking at here is that overall view of the workflow and that kind of that journey for a lead that comes through. But in terms of what that makes up, with FranchiseBase, you've got these tools to be able to manage your leads and view them at a glance in these groups. Similar to a CRM, it's got all of their details on their record, so you can collaborate with other members of your team. Things like actions, contact details, documents, what stage they're at, what kind of information they've received. So things like, you know, these scheduled emails that I was talking about earlier, you can schedule them. It's got a nice design tool. And then in this example here, you can see like the statistics of who's opened them, what links they've clicked, and all of that kind of useful information about them. As well as that, quite a good thing to have is, so when you've got a record of somebody, you can add the notes and things like that. But another thing that you can do is to be able to see what kind of things are scheduled. So what's coming next. And you're able to see that on a kind of per prospect basis. This particular one's, they've received the brochure, they've opened it 3 times. They might have clicked some links. We can also see which ones they're scheduled to receive in the future. So it's quite nice to be able to see that on a per lead basis. But in terms of what makes up the content that you would be sending is it's both emails and it's both text messages as well. So I mean, in this example, if I just go into the editor now, so this is just to modify our template. It's something that people might be quite familiar with. It's kind of like a visual editor for emails, similar to say MailChimp and other ones that are like it. But it's there's a lot of customization that you can make without needing to do any kind of coding or anything like that. And then the other style of template is text messages. So you can customize your text messages, you can schedule them, they'll be sent according to, you know, whatever kind of schedule you've designed. The final other thing that I'll just quickly cover is instant send, which is if you want to send a campaign immediately, email, text message, you can do that. And you can do that to a group, or you could do it to just your whole audience. But you were able to just kind of define who they are as part of the whatever stage you're working with, and send it from there. So that's the very brief demo of FranchiseBase. There's quite a lot more. I'd be happy to to talk about that separately.
Great, thank you, James. James, can you just take the presentation off for the moment so that we can see onto the big slide? If you take that off as well and just lose it. Yeah, that's great. Okay, thank you very much. That was really comprehensive and covered a huge amount of information. So if everyone wants to come off mute, if you want to stick your videos back on, get a bit of hopefully questions and interaction going. My question to kick off with, and I'll kind of let other people lead after that. But I know, James, historically, we've always toggled between should franchise recruitment be carried out, if you like, through its own specific website, or should be carried out as part of the overall company website. Based upon the presentation that you went through this morning, are we now at a stage where it should be part of the overall general website rather than having a specific website to manage franchise recruitment?
Well, it depends, but but ideally, personal opinion is that if you have a website, you've worked to get that established, and then maybe you've adopted the franchise model. You've already built up that kind of reputation, and you've already, your website is indexed on the search engines, and then to add a franchising kind of site or mini site to that, you're going to immediately get some benefit that it's going to be picked up quicker. If you build a completely separate site, it's probably going to take a little bit longer to start making progress with it. But it really depends at the same time how you want to present that to the customer. I know that some franchises in the past have wanted to really just have that clear separation between their customer facing site and then the franchise. So it's those are factors as well. But I would always recommend to build it into your website. It could be its own. It could be like a mini site. It could, once you reach that area, it's like a site of its own. But if it comes under your main website, you're going to benefit from everything you've already built up in terms of, you know, the search indexes, Google listings, and things like that.
Okay, thank you. We've got a question on the chat room. James, if you'd like to have a look at that, it says,
Yeah, so
you mentioned about using existing franchisees to assist with lead generation. Can you expand, please?
yeah, so I think that would be all about kind of, it's an opportunity with an existing franchisee to kind of demonstrate, you know, and tell the story of that franchisee in a way that is going to be convincing to somebody who's first learning about your franchise. So I mean, if that starts out with some kind of material, and like I mentioned, it could be a video interview, could be a bit of a bio, then it's just something that you're going to be able to produce for people to relate to. I know that quite often further down the line as well, you know, when a lead is engaging quite clearly, you know, with you, then you might kind of, they might speak to you might introduce them to the franchisee, and get that going so they can understand some of the, you know, some of the things that they experienced as part of the process. But in a nutshell, you know, tell the story of your franchisee, and build that up as tell that as a success story that's going to inspire other people.
Right. We've got a question now from Mark. You mentioned that there's a difference between paid ads and organic content. What difference have you noticed between the organic content on each platform? And is there a particular platform you recommend?
I think with if we start with paid, I mean, you tend to have an approach with paid. You know, let's just say it's a paid landing page. You tend to be quite quick. You want to capture them as quickly as possible. So you'll tend to be really you'll be razor focused on getting them to whether it's to fill out an inquiry form, and just to download an ebook, things like that. You know, tend to be quite common with paid ads. But with organic content, you can just kind of leave that to the side. And if over time you're building up this kind of real resource, then, you know, the ideal kind of person could begin reading that, and they're just going to be able to follow it in their own time, and engage there. So in terms of, you know, the difference, it does tend to be that organic can be that kind of more laid back sort of, you providing something useful, whereas paid, you do tend to try and convert quickly, from somebody who's clicked a link to getting in touch with you, because you know that you don't have much time to do it. And if you're paying for every click, so that's definitely, you know, the factor.
Right. I think Mash, have you got a question?
Yeah, James, on the issue of FranchiseBase, would you say something like FranchiseBase is suitable for smaller franchisors that have limited resources in terms of staffing, because it allows them to recruit, manage data and all those sort of things? Or do you think that sort of software is just as good for larger organizations that may have more resources, more people?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I mean, FranchiseBase did start out, a lot of the, I think initially it was something that if a franchise has just become established, then it's a set of tools that they're going to be able to use to get started quickly. They're not going to have to kind of reinvent the wheel to get everything set up, and it gives them a nice structure to work in for, you know, their ops manual, beginning with some franchise recruitment, sharing material, documents, things like that. But I think as it's progressed, and you know, we've started to get franchises on board that are established, it's something that I mean, there's a lot of options out there. You could, you know, your operations manual could be on Google Drive, could be Dropbox. Your CRM, you could go with Salesforce, things like that. But it's the idea, really, the principle is that it's things that it's to get everything kind of set up already that's going to work for a franchise. So I mean, I do think that it can have just as much appeal for an established franchise as one that hasn't been around for too long.
Well, I think, Chris, are you using FranchiseBase?
Yes, we are, and we've our use of it has expanded as the capacity of it has expanded. So we started by using it to provide our online documentation, and that helped us in the process of reorganizing all of that and making it more accessible. And certainly, you know, our existing franchise network are adopting it more and more and finding it useful and using it more, I think, than they're using it more visibly. To me, I can see when our franchises are researching or looking back in the ops manuals, whereas when it was a paper document, there was no visibility of that. So that's an advantage to us, as well as the ability to update it and notify people of updates. But we've also just switched over our franchise recruitment into the lead handler side, into the FranchiseBase recruitment side from another system, and found it much easier to use in many, many ways. So, you know, it's if anybody wants to talk to me, you know, one-on-one about their experience of using it, I'm happy to, you know, to have that conversation. But I'm an advocate for the great product that James has been building.
Great, thank you very much. Questions? Sandra, you were featured on a few of the... You're on mute.
I have a question. After Sandra.
No, go ahead. Sorry.
So it was a question about SEO, really, and the general principle of SEO of a franchise recruitment website. It feels for me like it's quite an expensive activity because we're chasing the portals all the time. And the portals have generally a bigger spend, and I'm prepared to commit to, you know, cleaning franchise, for example. What's your current thinking, James, on SEO for franchise recruitment?
It's the same principle of you know, for your website, it's about producing content. I mean, my just kind of ethos really is that you should write content and produce, you know, marketing materials for what you think that people would find interesting. But you can use that along with, you know, if you're gonna do paid ads, then use some of those techniques, like think about kind of targeting, you know, the location. You might have a priority location for recruitment. You know, really use that ability to define your audience. If it's a Google ad, let's say, to define your audience and just kind of pinpoint down into, you know, what's the market like in that area, and what's the opportunity there, what kind of demand is there already. And then at the same time, just, you know, as I said, just produce content that's going to appeal. It's, you know, it's make it informative. Probably long form content does tend to work better because you can hit on more keywords that you're going to target to rank for. But yeah, and I think it does require, you know, varied approach. You can't really just focus on a single area. It should be to, you know, put at least a little budget into maybe some paid, and then kind of time to work on the organic content and the blog posts and things like that. And then again, as you said, you know, directories as well is one way to do it.
Julie, can I ask a quick question? Sorry, Sandra, to put in. Do you feel, James, that with a limited budget, a franchisor's website could ever compete in the SEO rankings against the big budgets of the franchise portals? Do you think they can make headway and a dent in those sort of search listings, you know, with the right sort of content, the right sort of limited SEO activities and AdWords, and in a limited budget? Do you think that could ever happen?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think when it comes to franchise directory sites, it's, I mean, let's put aside paid ads, because they're going to have a bigger budget and they're going to be able to appear in the top results for paid ads for a lot of searches. But if you think about the actual content that they're ranking for in the organic search results, it's probably going to be fairly, you know, if I use the example with Chris, cleaning franchises and that kind of like domestic service sort of area, that's pretty broad. So the next thing would be to think, okay, well, what kind of things are people going to be searching for, that I could appeal to, that's a bit more detailed, and with your website and even with just a blog, you could produce the content that's going to start to rank for some of those searches. Maybe the volume isn't going to be quite as big, because, you know, a very broad search like cleaning business for sale, it's not really the area you're going to try and focus on. And it's something that you're going to kind of build up over time. And maybe in those circumstances, then, you know, things like social media, LinkedIn is becoming a really kind of, a lot of attention is going on to LinkedIn within franchising. That's something that you can do, you know, manually, and you can draw people back to your website and to your content with that. So I think there is, yeah, absolutely, it's possible. It's tough, but it's to kind of think, well, if you're going to put everything into, you know, your ad budget, then you're going to really struggle, because you're not going to be able to match the kind of budgets that are going in elsewhere. So it's finding different approaches to finding leads.
Thanks.
Right. Thank you. Sandra, did you have a question?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to say that we've been using FranchiseBase since we launched our franchise last year, and it's great. I mean, it saves us so much time. So if anybody's got any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Final questions from the floor. I think we've probably got time for one final question before we do the wrap up. If there's anything that anyone would like to ask. Chris,
Sorry, Julie,
Can you?
Julie, I'll just ask one last question. James, I know that you've got extensive experience of franchising, working with a franchise company. If anybody wanted a review of their existing website, that, you know, from a franchise perspective, and sort of general advice and guidance, is that something that you can do turn around fairly quickly?
Yeah, just send me an email or give me a call. I can, you know, I'm always happy to speak to, I'm always keen to speak to new and different franchises. Happy to talk and give any advice, share ideas. Absolutely.
Okay.
thank you. Natalia, yes, we can hear you. So if you come off mute.
Oh, great, thank you. Mine wasn't as much a question, more of a comment, really. And thank you, James. That was a great presentation. Just to say that when I was, you know, part of a franchisor, in my experience, using a product that has been specifically created to be suitable for franchised networks tends to be better and easier to use from a franchisor's perspective than using a product that's been created as a as a product not specifically for the franchise industry, but just generally for everyone, from sort of legal regulatory perspective, but also ease of use and being able to make adjustments, you know, because as a franchise industry, as franchisors, our setup is different than, for example, a corporate setup where it's a different type of structure. So certainly, that's the only thing I wanted to just say. Those of you who are franchisors, it certainly is worth sort of looking at it from that perspective as well, and considering ease of use and regulatory compliance, those kind of aspects.
Right, thank you. That's super. Well, finally, I think we'd just like to share, thank everyone for coming. The recording will be available from next week online to share and view again at the our online group. And the next event that we've got coming up in May, we've got Tim Morris, who's with us today from Symphony. It's the final session talking about recruitment, and Tim's going to share with us his vast experience of franchise recruitment, and specifically looking about finding time and the right support to manage franchise recruitment, and that's on Friday the 6th of May. And then the June event is followed, the next one is Simon Wise, and Nick Bramley, who we're going to be talking about then when you've actually got your franchisees on board and starting to build your business, how to start to build successful franchise support team. And we've got 2 speakers that day, Simon, that most of us know, and Nick, who normally co-hosts this event, but say today isn't with us because he's had a medical procedure yesterday, but he's absolutely fine, so definitely missed, but be back fighting fit next month.